Greetings everybody, welcome back to the garage. Today we are going to do something on that C4 A6 that actually would apply to the C4 S4 as well. And that is a, wherever it is here, radiator replacement. Good times. Actually not as hard as it might sound. There's some talk you could do it in the car without pulling the bumper off, but honestly I've done it in the past. It's easy to pull the bumper. It's a couple bolts, a few screws. So we're gonna do that method, and that way we can get in and have a good look at everything. But we're gonna get started on that right now. Now you'll notice that there's water running out of this. We have actually flushed this car probably 3 or 4 times at this point, getting all the crud out of the system. And if you can see the overflow bottle here, you'll see what I mean. That is properly filthy on this car, and we're hopeful it seems to run okay. It's not overheating or pressurizing or anything, but we suspect that it was a combination of things that killed the radiator in this car. And number one, here in Minnesota we have really hard water, and a lot of shops will fill their cooling systems with tap water, which is basically the kiss of death for most everything. Heater core, I mean, you name it. This car has had a new heater core, so I'm hopeful that that's actually still okay. And even this radiator doesn't look like it's that old, but the other problem is shops often don't pay attention to the type of coolant being used, and they will mix. And so this car looks like it may have had a mix of some nasty coolant. It was like, kind of came out looking like apple cider, and we did 2 or 3 flushes of this system, capturing it all and running it to recycling, coming back, doing it again. Finally got it to the point where now it's just water in the system. It flows clear, but we have an issue with the radiator is clearly plugged, because I have about 165 degrees Fahrenheit up here and about 73 on the low side over there. So that tells me that the interior of the radiator is indeed plugged, and I'm using a little laser temp scanner to determine that. But yeah, so we have a new radiator sitting over here, and our first step is going to be to remove this core support. We're going to leave the headlights in. We're going to take off the bumper, the trim pieces, etc. But we're going to start by taking off this, and I'm going to point out real quickly on the back of these, your car, you may have zip ties going around, but you'll notice these little clips in here. That's what holds your hood release cable. I'm going to leave these intact. These are actually a little difficult to come by. I have a new set, or I bought several of them from Audi Tradition in Germany. So I can replace them if they break, but in this instance, I don't think I really need to remove them, because I'm simply going to remove this piece and then set it back out of the way, because it really isn't going to impact us other than getting the top off of here so we can lift the radiator out. So in order to do that, you have 2 screws here for the headlight, these bolts, so bolt, 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 this one on the front right here, and then the same on the other side, that one, headlights again, and the hold down bolts. I actually can't remember if this one is part of it. No, it's not. It's actually right here. It's just these 2 end ones. So same on this end. Don't do that, just do these. And that will allow us to move that core support up out of the way, and we can get going on the next step, which is going to be taking that off, pulling these out gently, and there's a little tab underneath them. So if you can gently pull it back, and I'll get to that here in just a minute. But let me start with the core support here. So if it's your first time doing this, I've just removed all these screws on the top, 2 little screws here. Your car may or may not still have those, but now this piece should be free to move back here. As you can see, I can just slide it back, and then this piece will come out easy enough. I can pull that. Now there's 2 Phillips screws on the front edge of each corner here. And then with the covers on these, I couldn't do it on camera because I only have one hand here, but you're gonna gently grab that cover, start pulling it out, and then get a finger behind it so that you can actually pull on this piece rather than the cover itself, because you don't want to break the tabs on the cover. So you're going to gently pull this out and then put your finger right about here. You can see this top tab on here. That hooks into the back of the cover, and you're just going to gently push up on the little tab on the cover to release it, and then it will sort of tilt down this way and off. So if I show you the cover on the inside, you want to make sure you don't break these. You can see this plastic receiver tab there. That's what goes over the top. The little nubs go on the bottom. So I'm basically just pushing that up a little bit and rocking it off and away. And that way you can do it without destroying these, cracking them and creating more problems for yourself upon reassembly. So reassembly is just the same. You basically just put the bottom on first, and then the top should just click into place over that little nub. So my next step, I'm going to pull these corner pieces off. Once again, I just pull this out so I have a little room to work with, and then I can sneak this out over the nozzle here. So it's a little finagling, but once you get it out of ways, you can easily accomplish that. So I'm going to do that on both sides, and we're going to continue on. And on this piece under the headlight, I will point out that it does have this insert on this end, which actually slides into the corner piece right there. So as you pull it out, you're going to have to actually pull that loose down there as well, and then just finagle it over the nozzle. So that part is done. I'm going to do the other side now. So now we've got basically the core support moved back away, so we can see the top of our radiator. And of course, all of this is going to have to come off in order to, we're going to leave the AC condenser here in the car and support it, and then we're going to take the radiator out. So I will have to do all this, but first things first, same with all this molding. Like, once I get this out of the car, then I will transfer it from the old to the new, and hopefully your new one comes with all the holes in the appropriate places. I know I've had to do some creative drilling on a couple of aftermarket units in the past, but we're going to take out like these little brackets here on each side, and of course these trim pieces, because we have to get all of this separated. But that brings us to the bumper. Now there's two Allen head bolts that hold this bumper on primarily. You've got a couple. Get your lower belly tray off first, so this one's already been removed, and then you're going to go around to the side of the car, and you may have some screws here to do that holds the bumper cover to the fender liner. So make sure you have all those loose. There's nothing holding those, so that you'll be able to slide this off that way. But we need to take out the lower grills. So first you're going to pull out the tow hook, especially if you have this little decorative piece on it. You're going to have to pull that off right there. Take that off so that you can slide this grill out around it. And I'm going to sneak these off without taking off the plate frame. I've done it a million times in the past. So I got to get these lower grills out so that we can gain access to the two Allen bolts that hold this bumper on. So that's my next step. And if, in case you're wondering how to get this out, in my case, I think the most effective way, I just take a flat blade screwdriver and I pry it between the two grills, because it goes into this receiver right here, and I just give a gentle pry, which should pop out that end of the grill, and then I do the same on that side, and then just slowly pull each side out. In my case, I found I could just stick this under here a little bit while putting, some tension on the grill here, just giving it a slight tug with my fingers and prying the lower side out. That should do the trick. And then I can just sneak it out behind that plate bracket. I will say, going back in, sometimes I have to pull the plate bracket off to get it back in, but I'm going to be hopeful that this one will cooperate with me. Oh, and when you do put it back in, it's always good practice to actually do some zip ties, like around that structure, if you still have some structure left. These do like to pop out if you kiss parking blocks or even at speed. So I always like to throw a little zip tie around there as some added security because they're not easy to come by these days. So there's that. Next step, I don't really need to worry about the corners because I need to get access right here is where my bolt is, I believe. Yep, that feels right there on each corner. So I'm gonna get the Allen bolts and hopefully these come out. We'll see. Rust belt cars can be real interesting on these sometimes. Okay, the bumper is off the car, as you can see. Just leaving that top trim piece, which is a couple of bolts underneath that I'm gonna have to remove to get that off. But you can also notice it's dripping wet, and that is because I like to hose this off before I remove it, and I can get a lot of the crud out of here once you have good access with a hose. And don't use a pressure washer because you don't want to bend the fins in the condenser here. But as I go through this, it's actually quite clean now, but initially it was just chocolate milk coming out of this thing and sand and all sorts of nasty debris. So do a good job and get that all cleaned out. You'll help your AC efficiency for sure. But I'm going to continue. I'm going to take the little trim pieces that hold that center trim off, and then we're going to remove these rubber gaskets on the outer edges here, which these are in remarkably good shape for a car with 210,000 miles from 96. But yeah, I'm going to go ahead and start doing more removal of trim, etc., and we'll get closer and closer to pulling this radiator. Okay, everybody, here we are on day 2, and normally, no, this does not take that long. It is just that it's been very warm here in Minneapolis, and we have very poor air quality right now, thanks to the Canadian wildfires. So I've been doing just a little bit on this each morning before I basically start working. So today, we've got the nose ready to go. I'm gonna start taking off the trim pieces here. So we're gonna start with taking off this piece, these side trim pieces here, and then I can start loosening some of this in preparation of getting the radiator itself out of here. And once I get these side trim pieces off, then there'll be the main radiator mounts that we need to remove as well, but I'll show you that here in just a second. Okay, so now I'm gonna start transferring things off of Francis, the old radiator, to Francis Jr., the new one. And if you wonder why I'm calling it Francis, it's because I'm going to recommend that you put gloves on, because if you keep calling it Francis, it will cut you. These are rather sharp. And yes, those of you that are young have no idea what I'm just talking about there, but if you're about my age, you've no doubt seen the movie. Anyhow, we're gonna just basically set the new one up next to the old one and compare and contrast and make sure everything looks correct before we start mounting things. And you're gonna have to make sure you can get these loose. These are your mounts. So there's one on each side. Passenger side over here, of course, US spec car. And all of these little clips here are gonna have to transfer over to the corresponding places on the other radiator. So I'm gonna go ahead and start moving over some of that hardware before I start taking things out, just so I don't have it fall off in the process and lose it. But in a nutshell, that's kind of where we start. We're gonna start kind of cleaning that stuff up. And finally, we're going to end up removing this, and you have to also take the fan off of the back side. And I think there's just the top and bottom bolts for that. But of course, that's gonna be a little awkward, kind of hanging out there. And so I will cross that bridge when we come to it. It's just a matter of kind of zip tying. I'll actually zip tie the fan to the support to hold it up out of the way while I get the new radiator in place. Interesting thing, this one is an OE radiator, so that's pretty impressive. 96, still original to this day. I will say my 93 Red S4 still has the original radiator in it as well. Considering that this looks like it may have had coolant mixing going on, that's extra impressive. It is obviously clogged, but in the case of my red car, I think it's survived simply because I was pretty diligent about replacing the coolant and water and used only distilled water all these years. So it definitely helps prolong your life on these heater cores and radiators. Red car, knock on wood, also has the original heater core at this point. So anyhow, I'm going to start transferring some of this hardware and continue with the swap process. So this job has been going entirely too easy until now. And this is a common issue on these cars. We have encountered full Minnesota, and that means right there, that is a broken radiator mount bolt. And luckily on this side it sheared off. That makes it actually really easy to remove the radiator because I can just slide it right off of that. And I do have another one of these mounts, so I just need to, I can get it loose from the bottom now, and we'll slide that out. We'll end up have to replace the bolt in that. But the difficulty is, of course, on the side that does not have easy access. This is the easy one. The driver's side, as you can see, is a little bit harder to get to. And so you're gonna need a deep socket with a wobble, and you can actually get it out of here, but there's not a lot of leverage and it pushes on that, so you gotta be kind of careful how you attack that. So I'm going at it from the bottom, just with a regular hand wrench, and it's pretty seized. So we're gonna let this one marinate in the juices there for a bit, and hopefully we can get that, it's a 13, if we can get that apart without breaking it, it would be fantastic. But yeah, so in the meantime, I'm just gonna continue moving a couple of these other little things over to the new setup. I've got most of the hardware off. I'll start taking the fan off the backside while that hopefully loosens up a little bit through some liquid magic. But these are kind of the things you run into, and like I said, I do actually keep a few of these mounts in stock because this is a pretty common occurrence for me. I've had these break probably a half dozen times doing timing belts, and most of the time I just loosen this side a little bit so that it can swing. And on a timing belt, which is coming up soon, by the way, we're going to have a full timing belt service on a 94 S4. I usually just loosen this side and swing the radiator out away from the car. So yep, so far, I mean, all things considered, this is going very well, and I really don't have that much time into it, so can't really complain. So, little update, it's a little warm here. Just trying to crack through the last of these. Got stuck on the driver's side radiator bolt, but managed to get that out with a little patience and a lot of PB Blaster. And then I'll show you what we're doing now. So you can see it's just, everything is loose on this cooler line. That's loose, ready to come off, just kind of held in place. Radiator fan held in place here. I've got a couple bolts on the bottom that are kind of unpleasant to get at, but I'll be able to get those. The difference between the UrS4 and this car, this has an automatic transmission and thus has these cooler lines. And so I'm working on, I got the top line out, but that bottom one is being rather stubborn. You can see it's out a bit, but I need to get that out the rest of the way, and a couple little screws on the bottom, and then I should be able to get this thing out. It's just going to take a little patience to wiggle that thing free down there. But all in all, it's going pretty well, other than the broken mount on this side, which I do have a spare mount, so that's not a big deal. And like I said, I've broken a bunch of those doing timing belts on the AANs, so not my first rodeo there. But this should be done either later today or tomorrow, depending on how much longer I want to work in the heat here. At least I got shade, but it's kind of hard to see when the sweat keeps running in your eyes. And we did actually put a new coolant bottle in there because the old one was, well, you couldn't even see the level of the coolant. So I'm hopeful that it stays clean. I mean, we've flushed this thing, flushed and recycled coolant on this so many times that I think it should be just about spotless inside right now. Other than the heater core will cycle a little bit, but I'm going to do distilled water in it when I first fire this back up, and we'll do one more flush and fill just through the new radiator and make sure we get all the crap out of the core as well. But then we'll fill her up and we'll be done. So let me go back to that line and a couple screws underneath on the backside, which are kind of a pain to get to, but we'll be back in just a minute here with the next step. So here's one where I wish I was kidding. Brand new radiator from Rock Auto leaks profusely. Put some coolant in it and it immediately spits it out. It is completely sealed down there and it's just running out of the corner of the radiator. So it does not have a good seal at all. So I have to tear all of this apart and do it again. I love it. Okay, not that it matters, but it is now, I'm gonna say a couple weeks later. Had to reorder the radiator. Of course, the one that I had purchased for this car was the last one available from Rock Auto. So to their credit, so far the return or exchange process has been very straightforward. I did shoot video of this thing leaking as it's continuing to do over my shoulder here. It is leaking water out of the corner. But they have not requested for it in return, which is a bonus because there's nothing more pointless than mailing a junk radiator or shipping it back. But much to my surprise, they didn't even ask for proof on this one. So kudos to them for making this painless. My replacement one is a Molly Bear unit, which has come from my friends at German Auto Works in St. Louis Park, Minnesota. So thank you to Hunter and Steve there. Not free, obviously. I did pay for this, but I can now proceed with pulling out the junk new radiator and replacing it with the hopefully good new radiator. So as you can see, I've already got it mostly torn apart and I am just taking the radiator mounts off, and then we're gonna go in and transfer things over. So fingers crossed this one actually works. Oh, and a quick note, just for those of you, I know I mentioned removing those radiator mounts, which are right here. This side's easy to get to. Just, put a 13 on each side, and then I use that wobble and attachment. This side as well, I can fit that wobble with attachments right through there onto that, hold it on the bottom with a 13. And this is what I have rigged up. I'm not putting a ton of torque through this thing, hence non-impact. But that actually does the trick on the driver's side. So it's kind of a convoluted deal. Obviously, without the little impact here, I can just go on there. But that did it. Took it right off in a zip here. So away we go. Out comes this new radiator. Okay, so let's just take a quick look at the difference in construction from the APDI radiator, which was on close at Rock Auto for all of $82. And this Molly Bear, which was about $150. I will say right off the bat, the cheaper one has these little mounting tabs here. This is for your air intake snorkel. And these have a little bit of flex to them. And that's actually quite nice because sometimes that snorkel doesn't fit just perfectly. And on the Bear unit here, or Molly Bear, it has these little straps, and this was actually floating around in the box. It wasn't in here, and getting it back in properly took a little bit of effort, and they don't move at all. So if these holes don't line up with your location, you're gonna have a bit of a fun time, and I suspect that might be the case. So I'm gonna have a look here and see if there's any kind of, it doesn't, looks like I might be able to actually retrofit that onto here. And this may work fine, but if not, I may end up swapping it for that, which is just a bracket that goes over the edge there and goes in. So just thought that was kind of interesting. Other than that, they're pretty close. This obviously has little ridges on it. Some of the machining looks a little nicer, I would say, for the automatic transmission cooler inputs here. But other than that, they're pretty similar. So yeah, hopefully everything will line up transferring things, but if not, I'll let you know. So the good news is the new radiator is in. As you can see, reassembly has begun and it is not leaking. I have water in the system. I'm doing a little bit of final flush here. I'm gonna start it and let it circulate with the distilled water that's in the system. And kind of just get the heater core up to temp a little bit. And then I'm going to drain it all, and then I'll do the final fill and bleed with the coolant. So a little extra time, but this really was filthy. The cooling system was just disgusting when we started. So I'm going to make sure, I mean, like I said, we've done this flush at least 3 to 4 times before this, and it's pretty clean now, but I'm seeing little traces of stuff that's still circulating. So I'm going to do that and let it drain into a bucket here and do one more flush and fill. Okay, as you can see, I've got fresh coolant in this. I'm actually switching this car over to Pinto Frost E right there. And I've done a little bit of bleeding already. So as you can see, I've got the bleeder right down here. And these you want to be very careful with because these tend to be quite fragile. But you're just going to crack it open. Should get, actually we don't get any bubbles out anymore, which is a good sign. And I'm getting heat out of the dash vents as well. So yeah, if I come back here, got the climate control set to high. I have nice hot heat coming out. So that's a pretty good sign that we might have this bled. Yep, now I've got just liquid coming out. But when I did it just a minute ago, and I had hoped to capture it here, but it seems like that was the end of it. It was actually bubbling, foaming around that, and bubbling quite a lot. So now it looks like it's pretty happy. Yep, it's just plain liquid coming out at this point, so I will gently tighten that. And this one is basically good. I just need to put the front bumper on, check it for leaks one more time. Like I said, this is essentially the same process for the automatic and the manual in the V6 and the inline 5. The same core support and everything. The only difference is the automatic has the transmission cooler loop on the passenger side here in the US. Other than that, just the same thing. Hopefully that is it. Obviously reassembly is the reverse of removal. So I've got everything back in here, And if you are doing one of these with an automatic and you've got the cooler lines on the back side of here, make sure you hook those up before you put this intake in, because this blocks the top one. You can obviously remove this after this is in, but it's much easier to just do it before you assemble all that. So get all that together and then put that on. Just a little public service reminder, because guess who forgot? Or at least I didn't get it fully tightened. I had the line kind of in place, but I didn't get it fully tightened, and then I just had to remove that intake once more. So at this point, I just have to button up the washer line across the bottom there and a couple more clips, finish putting on the lowers underneath the headlights, and it's about ready to have the bumper put back on. So I'm going to tentatively call this one a success at this point. I do need to change that hideous fuel filter. I don't know, previous shop wrapped it in a rag because it wasn't quite the right filter size. So I have the correct one. We're going to change that, and then we're going to turn our attention to this car, and this is going to be our next major project. We're going to do full step-by-step timing belt on this car, looking at the AC system, fuel filter, air filter, major maintenance, step-by-step, and you're going to see it all right here. So as usual, thank you for watching, and there's more coming soon.